Kemmunion, everybody. Dua for joining me this Sunday afternoon for our communion service. I hope y'all enjoyed listening to that track. That's the Divine Cycle from Nasit's first album, A New Ambiance. That's one of my favorite tracks. So that's why I played it, because I wanted to hear it. I hope y'all enjoyed it as well. And if you don't already have his album, it is still available for purchase um, at templeofanew.org. Hashtag shameless plug. Before we go any further today, let us begin by properly opening the way with our Sunday morning prayer. So please join me in saying, Amatuim panatir, Sauek tuim and panatir, Au duauma, Kedipa Haru. The translation, give yourself to Netter daily, keep yourself for Netter daily, and do it tomorrow as you do it today. We give homage to the Creator, who is like our Father and who is like our Mother, who is everything that we can perceive and everything that we cannot perceive, who is everything and yet is no one thing at all, who comes to us in the form of the Netru Ra, who is the light of the heavens, the light of the inner planes, as well as the light of our lives, who shines the light for us on the path of Ma'ati, which is the path of truth, justice, righteousness, and harmonious balance, who comes to us in the form of the light of vitality, giving us the strength and the endurance to live and act upon that which we know to be true. Homage to you, the one who shines in and through us as a beacon of light for those who are blind to the facts of their place, their position, and their responsibility in the divine scheme of things. May we be ma'akeru, true of thought, word, and deed to our highest reality. And in the moments of crises and the dark nights of the soul, when it appears that everyone and everything else has let us down, so it is and so shall it be. Amen ma'at. Ma'akeru. All right, I see I got a few people on Facebook. I got a few more people on YouTube. So I do want to know who's chiming in and where y'all are joining me from. So it's time for the roll call. Who y'all are? Where y'all at? As y'all know, I am in right outside of Newark, New Jersey. I'm in Union, New Jersey. It is raining again today, but they do say April showers make May flowers. So I guess it's all in divine order to Aneta. You know, you gotta have rain. It is just as natural to the order of things as sunshine. Our sister Ashanti joining us from East Orange, New Jersey. I see you, sis. Naples, Florida in the house. I don't know if I've seen that one in a while. Welcome, Naples, Florida. Colorado is here. That's nice. That's what's up. Lincoln, Nebraska by way of East St. Louis, Illinois. Nice to see you again, Brother Jason. It's always good to see you join us. I love seeing the regulars on the line. Union is in the house. Portia in Sicklerville. Oh, Portia, it's so good to see you, man. To Aneta. Yes, yes. I know it's more of y'all than that. I can see the numbers. Come on, guys. All right, the rest of the folks who are on with us are shy. Either that or they're going to chime in later. That's okay. I'm just glad that y'all joined us today. I do like to know Hillside, New Jersey down the street. Also, Edmond, Oklahoma. Yes, and New Haven, Connecticut. Okay. I love seeing that. I love seeing how many states we could touch doing that. I love that. And those of you who are joining us and who are shy or who don't want to disclose your location, I understand and respect that. I appreciate you being here regardless. Shahid is in St. Louis as well. Nice to see you. Very, very nice. All right. Very glad for y'all to be here. All right. So today I've been inspired to talk about boundaries today. So our topic is boundaries. I want to start by pointing back to a communion in 2020 that I did where we talked about the role of the ego in our lives, like proper ego development. Because sometimes in spirituality, people will tell you that the role of like the work of being spiritual, or the work of being a spiritual person, or like the fully realized spiritual self, the divine self, has no ego, right? And I remember in that conversation, we talked about how the ego is not only a natural part of our personality and who we are, but it's also a necessary part of our personality. Some of y'all might remember this conversation, because what we talked about is how a fully realized divine being understands their ego, they respect their ego, they properly manage their ego. So they stop their ego from stalling their spiritual process, right? Because sometimes the ego will tell you you're in danger where you're not really in danger. Like when you're trying to change, the ego doesn't like change. So it'll be like, it'll treat that like it's a trauma, when really you should be leaning into the change. So sometimes you have to check your ego and get your ego out of the way, but you shouldn't be trying to eradicate the ego or death to the ego, because the ego's proper functioning is to protect you from harm, right? It is to have a strong enough sense of self to recognize yourself as someone who deserves to be protected. And so the ego identifies when and where you may be entering into or in situations where you're not being properly protected, and is warning you, it is signaling and going off, so that you take the necessary steps to get out of that situation or to protect yourself within that situation. So there is a need for your ego to exist, right? And there's a need for your ego to have proper functioning, so that you can clearly recognize the difference between a real threat and when you are really in danger, versus like when you're just going outside of your comfort zone because you're in a process of growing and evolving that requires you to be pushed into something that's unfamiliar. And the unfamiliar feels unsafe, but it doesn't mean it is unsafe. It just means it's unfamiliar. So your ego has to be able to know the difference, right? Knowing this difference, that quality, is what we call discernment, right? That ability to gauge or to judge, to properly perceive the space that you're in, the time that you're in, right? Like the quality and the ability to clearly judge, right? Without trauma, without hindrances, without fear or anxiety clouding your vision, right? That is equally as important to the conversation about ego as it is to the conversation about boundaries. Developing the quality of discernment in each and every one of us is necessary. And this is why we see our ancestors respect discernment to the extent that they divinized it in the Netter Impu, right? Discernment as a divine quality that every single one of us have to cultivate, understand, use, right? Like we must know this quality well, okay? So now, let me take a step back from that. We're going to come back around on discernment in a second, because it's really crucial to this conversation, but I wanted to start with that like as a foundation, if you will. So there are 3 key things that each of us should know, or I'm going to remind us of in this conversation about boundaries, right? Number 1, everybody needs boundaries. That's number one most important thing in a conversation about boundaries. Everybody needs them. Number 2, everybody must enforce their boundaries. And number 3, everyone must allow room for boundaries to evolve over time. All right? So let's start by talking about number 1. Everyone needs boundaries. When I was thinking about this, I thought about this thing that we sometimes do, especially in the Kemetic community, where we think about our ancient ancestors and we think about the society of Ma'at that they lived in, and we sometimes idealize that picture. We're like, oh, it was this all Black, idyllic, utopian society where everything always went right and everybody always lived well and everything was perfect. And why can't we get back to that perfect, Ma'atic, idyllic society that our ancestors had? Like, why can't we have that? And I know I'm not saying this for the first time. I feel like Nasit said it probably more than once, but it bears repeating. Our ancestors didn't have an idyllic society. Their society wasn't perfect. They lived with human beings. They themselves were human beings. And anywhere you find human beings, you're going to find human behavior. And human behavior is not perfect. Okay? Not everyone is always intentional or conscientious. Not everyone is always fair or balanced or just. Not everyone is righteous. Not every relationship is reciprocal. If everybody always did the right thing just because it was the right thing, without prompting, without reminder, without fear of punishment, without fear of reprisal, there would be no need for law. There would be no need for rules. There would be no need for law or enforcement or anything to remind you to stay on the path. And the whole structure of the Kemetic culture that we study, that we live, that we reconstruct in the modern day is to remind us of divine universal law, to remind us of the structure, and then to encourage us to walk that path to the best of our ability, right? When we stray, we talk about restoring Ma'at. When we get it right, we talk about the work of maintaining Ma'at. When we're doing well, we talk about how we proliferate Ma'at. Our ancestors started this. We're following in their footsteps. The only reason we're following in their footsteps is because they understood that Ma'at is not a thing that happens naturally on its own. It is a thing that has to be constantly tended to, okay? Which means they also had to constantly tend to it in their society. Now, our ancestors may not have had to deal with the crack epidemic. They may not have had to deal with institutionalized racism. They didn't have to deal with the school to prison pipeline. They didn't have to deal with capitalism. They didn't have to deal with processed foods that wreak havoc on our body and cause diabetes and cancer and all other ailments and issues in our bodies. But our ancestors did have to deal with foreign invasions. They did have to deal with periods of instability and unclear leadership, what we know now as intermediary periods. They did have to deal with famine and poverty. And we know this because they had harvest rituals. We know this because they did grain storage, they did food storage, right? They did Weprenpet, which was a ritual to extend gratitude to the divine beings to ensure that they would have enough food and enough resources that they wouldn't have to experience famine or poverty in the year to come. And also to extend gratitude and say thank you that we didn't have to experience famine and poverty in the year before. So we know that they experienced these things, right? They built a culture around what they experienced. And so even though they didn't experience what we experienced, they experienced their own types of imperfection, their own types of challenges, their own types of struggles that they also had to contend with. So laws are created to address societal needs, okay? When we talk about universal order, we're talking about the order of the universe. When we talk about law, we're talking about the order of society. And when we talk about boundaries, we're talking about the order of your personal existence, your personal life. We're talking about order in every single one of those instances. We're talking about Ma'at, right? So order, again, in the cosmos is how the universe keeps everything aligned. Law is how society keeps things aligned and functioning. And boundaries is how you keep your personal life aligned and functioning. Okay? So if there are rules in the universe, right, about how we should engage with the world around us, how we should engage with nature, how we should engage with the Netru, how we should engage with our ancestors, how should we pray, rules about how we pray, rules about how we invoke the Netru, rules about how to make offerings, rules about how to approach your ancestors, the right and wrong way to invoke ancestors and to venerate them and things like that. If there are rules about how to respect your elders, about how to approach your elders, about how to let them teach you and how to guide you, then surely you, as an instrument of the divine, are meant to have rules about how other people are meant to engage with you as well. Okay? If the Netru have rules about how we approach them, then you also should have rules about how you are supposed to be approached. Okay. So first and foremost, you got to have boundaries. What are the rules that you have in place for folks to engage with you? If someone is looking to engage with you, if someone wants to or needs to for whatever reason, what are the rules that you have in place to allow that? What are the rules that you have in place to make sure that you are approached, that you are spoken to, that you are negotiated with, navigated with in a way that maintains a sense of respect, a sense of honor, that makes you feel okay about the interaction, a sense of reciprocity, a sense of ma'at in the interaction, okay? So again, first and foremost, there is no way that we exist as ma'atic people if we don't have boundaries, okay? Because again, boundaries is for us on a personal level what divine order is to the cosmos. But most importantly, you can't just have them. So let's move to number 2. You have to also enforce them, right? There's that saying that says, if you cannot protect what you have, then it's like not having it at all. If you cannot protect what you have, you might as well not have it, because anybody can come along and take it from you. So you could say you have a boundary, but if that boundary is flimsy and cannot stand up to pressure or stand up to the test of time, then it's not real. It's not there. It doesn't mean anything. So here's where the ego comes into play. Remember, I said the ego, the proper application of the ego is to serve to protect you, because the ego is supposed to make you feel strongly enough about yourself that you choose to maintain your boundaries. Because choosing to maintain your boundaries is an act of self-love. It is a demonstration of self-worth. It is a demonstration of self-respect. Okay? Now, I get that it's very easy when we talk about this to think that when we're being slack on our boundaries, that it is just a self-esteem issue. And I want to be clear, I think to some degree, when we are slack on our boundaries, there is sometimes a little bit of like lack of confidence or self-esteem that may be involved. But there's also other factors, right, in regards to our relationships with others. Like, for example, if you are in a situation where you're being gaslit into thinking or feeling or believing that your boundaries are too harsh, being gaslit, what it does is it erodes your sense of confidence. It instills in you a sense of doubt. It causes you to rethink everything you are, everything you believe, and it causes you to waver from your stance, right? So if you are being gaslit, if you have been gaslit and you find yourself wavering on your boundaries, it's not just because you have a self-esteem issue. It's because your self-esteem is being intentionally eroded by being gaslit, and that is what's creating like this decision for you to be flimsy about your boundaries, right? Another thing that could take place is like if folks have abandonment issues, if folks fear that having a boundary or enforcing a boundary is going to cause people to leave them, going to cause people to walk away from relationships, is going to cause you to miss out on experiences or opportunities. If you have FOMO, you got fear of missing out, you have fear of being alone, you have fear, you have fear around the status or the strength of your relationships, then you may feel a need to be flexible with your boundaries because you are striving to prioritize the relationships and striving to prioritize not missing out versus prioritizing your own self-preservation, okay? The other reason why we relax our boundaries is when we think it's deserved, right? We think we've evaluated a person. We think we've evaluated a situation. We think we've gotten to know this person, this situation well enough that we believe that relaxing our boundaries for this person is deserved, okay? And that's not really a confidence issue. That's a discernment issue, right? And if it goes right, then you have discerned well. And if it doesn't go right, then you have learned a valuable lesson, okay? But it's important to acknowledge that these issues and these questions and these doubts that you have, that keep you from enforcing your boundaries, from reinforcing them, from standing on your square, from saying no when you should say no, right? These issues do not always originate in you. They are sometimes instilled in you, right, by others. They are sometimes things that your experiences and your relationships cause you to internalize, right? Like this relationship, this thing, this person, this experience, this day, this what have you. I'm internalizing feelings about myself. I'm internalizing questions and doubt. I'm internalizing this issue, and now it's becoming self-doubt. Now it's becoming self-loathing. Now it's causing me to reevaluate my boundaries. The crazy part about that, right, is that our boundaries are meant to limit the amount of trauma that we take. So it's a really interesting balance, right, where you're taking on trauma because you are flexible on your boundaries, when literally your boundaries are in place to keep you from experiencing the trauma that you're internalizing, right? Your boundaries are meant to limit or reduce or even eliminate the amount of trauma that you experience. And your ego is meant to remind you to enforce those boundaries as protection. All right. So when it comes to number two, when we talk about maintaining our boundaries, I would point us back to the conversation we had just last communion about the work that we need to do on our own sense of self-love and our own sense of self-worth. Okay? Because if we have more compassion for others, right, and extend them more grace and give them more room and have more flexibility in our boundaries, and we do not have enough sense of self-preservation and self-protection for ourselves, then you will lose whatever little sense of self-love that you have, right? That's the thing that needs to be protected by these boundaries, is your sense of self, your sense of who you are, your sense of your self-importance, your sense of your self-worth. That is what you have to lose. Remember I said before, if you don't protect it, you don't even have it. You're going to lose it. If you can't protect what you have, then it's like not having it at all. So if you don't maintain your boundaries, you can't protect your sense of self. You can't protect your sense of self-worth. You can't protect your sense of self-importance. All right. You cannot preserve yourself. All right. So you are essentially having more compassion and care for other people than you are having for yourself. And that's out of order. So for that one, I would absolutely point us back to the conversation we had 2 weeks ago, where we talked about self-love and self-worth and the importance of cultivating that in our lives, the importance of making ourselves the most important plant in our garden that needs our nurturing, that needs our attention, that needs our love and care, right? That we give ourselves that energy, because our ability to maintain our boundaries depends on how well we care about ourselves and how well how high on the pedestal we put our need to preserve ourselves. All right. So number 3 in our conversation is that boundaries evolve as you do. Right? Let me phrase it the same way I phrased it before, which was, everyone must allow room for your boundaries to evolve. This is where discernment comes in. We talked about discernment earlier. Discernment as a divine quality that allows us to make that is a superior decision-making ability, right? Discernment is something that develops over time. It is not necessarily something that we have as children. Children do not have discernment, right? Because discernment, like when I looked up discernment in the dictionary, right? Discernment was defined. Where's the definition? Discernment was defined as the ability to perceive, understand, or judge things clearly. Young children don't necessarily know how to perceive or understand or judge things clearly. These are things that we are literally teaching our children as we're raising them, how to perceive, how to understand, how to judge. That's part of the raising process. What children do have is intuition. What all of us have is intuition. So how do we respond then when our child comes to us and says, mommy, daddy, this situation doesn't feel right. I don't like being around this person. I don't want to hug so and so. I don't want to go to so and so's house for a play date. I don't want to invite the other kid to my party. Like, how do we respond to that when they say, like, the vibe is off, right? When they say, like, this just don't feel right to me. Because I feel like some people will be like, well, why doesn't it feel right? And children don't know why it don't feel right. Just don't feel right. They be like, because they weird, because I don't like them, because I said so. And these are not, when you think about discernment, these are not like good logical reasons, right? They're not good. They're not logical. They are vibes. They are intuition. And something in the child that's telling them, please don't make me hug that person. Please don't make me play with that kid for whatever reason, right? It's just intuition. It's just instinct, right? For a lot of us, the adults in our lives spent time teaching us not to trust our intuition, right? Their responses actually kept us from fully trusting our intuition, right? Because many of us had adults in our lives who turned around and said, oh, but I'm going to just invite that kid over anyway, because you've got to learn how to be nice to everyone, right? Like I just said, I don't feel good about this person in my space. But you gotta learn how to be good to everyone. You gotta learn how to get along and respect differences, right? And he said, like, well, I don't really feel right hugging that person. Oh, but that's your relative. You gotta respect your relative. You got show them that you love. Give them a hug. It's just your auntie. It's just your uncle. You gotta hug your auntie and your uncle, right? And so you're sitting there as a child who does not have discernment or superior decision-making ability, who is trusting the adult in their life to guide them. And you're like, my vibe is telling me that this is off, but my adult is telling me that my vibe is off and that I should trust this person anyway. And so I should trust the person and not trust my vibe, right? That's the lesson. That's the message that we get, right? When the response is, well, you don't have a good enough reason, so therefore, let's ignore the intuition and let's do the thing that I think we should do, right? And so in adulthood, we end up spending all this time rebuilding our relationship and rebuilding our trust in our own intuition, rebuilding our trust in our own selves. Boundaries that we as adults make and maintain are supposed to be crafted by a combination of intuition and discernment. And so if you have a negative relationship with your intuition, if you don't trust your intuition, if your intuition is damaged, you'll likely experience trauma in your life as a result of being unable to properly understand or interpret vibes. Because if you don't have the capacity to tell yourself, I should trust this vibe. If you don't have trust in your vibes, then you'll allow people into your life, relationships into your life, jobs into your life, managers into your life, right? You'll allow situations and experiences to happen as you're developing your discernment because you didn't listen to your gut, because you didn't know to listen to your gut. Let's think about this in a concrete term. I want to use an example, right? I feel like everybody here has probably been asked to loan someone money before. So let's just think about someone who comes to you and they ask if they can borrow some money. Now think about yourself, maybe not yourself as you are now, as a developed person, as someone who is more realized, right? Let's go back to when you were a teenager or a young adult and you were coming out of childhood and you had internalized the lessons of the adults in your life and your intuition was damaged and your sense of discernment is still developing, and someone comes to you and they ask you, can they borrow money? And of course, when people say they're going to borrow money, the borrow is typically that they intend to pay you back, right? So they're like, oh, I promise I'm gonna pay you back. I'm gonna pay you back. I get my check on the 15th, so I'm gonna have it to you on the 16th. I promise, I swear, I swear. If you were like me or like most of the young people that I know, like most young people in the world, you probably gave that person some money. Might have been a friend, it might have been a family member. You might have gave that money the very first time they asked. You loan some money. Then the 15th comes, you're like, oh great, I'm gonna get my money back tomorrow. This is great. Then the 16th comes, then the 17th comes, then the 21st comes, then the 29th comes, then the next month comes. And you're like, hold up, so and so, where my money at? And they're like, I swear. And then week after week, month after month, pass, and you never see that money again. So now you've learned a valuable lesson, right? And a healthy way of going about setting up boundaries from that lesson that you've learned is, number one, to only loan what you don't need. If you desperate to get that money back, like, oh, I gotta pay rent, and you said you was gonna have it back to me, and now I'm short on my rent, you shouldn't have gave that money out because you needed that money, right? And now you're scrambling because this person that you loaned it to didn't give it back to you. Another way that you apply this lesson into a healthy boundary is to understand other people's habits so you can discern if they can be trusted to do what they say they're going to do. This person said, I'm going to pay you back on the 16th. How long you known this person? What from their habits have indicated to you that they're going to do what they say and say what they do? What of their habits have you observed that indicates that they're a trustworthy person? What have you observed from their habits that indicate that they care about your status and where you are and whether or not you're struggling and whether or not you're okay, right? What about their habits that you've observed that indicate that the two of y'all are close enough that they deserve this level of trust from you, right? That I'm going to give you this money, right? Another thing that you have to recognize in this scenario is, did you listen to your gut? What did your gut tell you? Did your gut tell you? Did your intuition tell you that this was a bad idea to loan this money? Did your intuition tell you, like, I don't know, I probably shouldn't do this, but this is my friend, we went to high school together, I'm gonna give them this money, they said they're gonna pay me back. And then the other part, right, in the process of setting up a new healthy boundary is that you determine what you are comfortable with and who you are comfortable with, okay? So meaning, like, you could decide that I'm willing to loan people money, but I'm not willing to loan you money anymore because you've already burned me. I'm willing to loan money as long as it's less than this specific dollar amount. And I'm never willing to loan money that goes above that dollar amount. I'm willing to loan money to certain groups of people and not to other groups of people. I'm willing to loan money after a certain period in the month and not before, right? Like, after I paid all my bills, if I have money left, then maybe I will loan. If I do not have money left, then I'm not loaning, right? These are boundaries. That is how you set up new boundaries, healthy boundaries. That's how boundaries evolve as you learn and grow, right? You've gone through this experience. You ain't get your money back. It was harmful to you. You like, dang, this is messed up. Yes, it's messed up, but now what can you do for yourself to protect yourself in the future, right? And this process that I just walked through, understanding what you need out of a situation, understanding other people's habits to discern if they're worthy of trust, listening to your intuition, and determining what you are comfortable with and with who. That's literally the 4 steps that go into creating new boundaries. Alternatively, you could just decide, I ain't never loaning nobody money ever again. That's it. I'm done. Never trusting nobody else ever again. I'm never giving out nothing ever again. Let me be clear. That's not a boundary. That's a wall. Okay? And walls are not healthy. Walls, especially around money, is stinginess, right? It's like a dam, right? That's in the blockage of your flow of abundance, right? Because a wall is erected out of fear and trauma. It is a trauma response, all right? And it's not your fault that you went through a trauma, but you do not have to have a trauma response right? You can still respond to trauma from a healthy place, right? That's the process. The process of healing is recognizing you went through the trauma and processing and releasing the trauma and responding in ma'at, right? So if you are built a wall and not a boundary, now you're being stingy. Now you're operating out of fear. Now you are not allowing for things in your relationships to flow, for things in your life to flow, for there to be sharing, for there to be reciprocity, for there to be communal energy, give and take. There's no room for flow because there is a wall. A wall also makes you incapable of seeing who and what is worthy, because a wall is nobody ain't never getting nothing from me again. That's a wall. So how can you tell if somebody deserves parts of you versus the person who don't deserve part of you? A wall is not discernment. Okay, again, a wall is a trauma response. All right. And if you have this kind of fear, right? If you're responding with this kind of trauma, right? If you're building these kinds of walls, how else is that showing up in your life? In what other ways are you stifling? Are you restricting? And are you limiting yourself because you've erected this wall that does not allow people, energy, opportunities to flow in and through? So let me be very clear. Both walls and boundaries exist to protect you. Walls are for protection. Boundaries are for protection. But boundaries have flexibility where walls do not. Boundaries allow those who deserve to get close to us. It allows them to get close to us. Boundaries allow us to be open when we want to be open and to be closed off when it is safe for us. Discernment tells us the difference between the two. Discernment is the quality that you need to know who is worthy, what is worthy, when is worthy, and who, what, and when is not. So going back to the idea that boundaries evolve as you learn and grow. That example that I just talked about in terms of loaning somebody money, again, something I feel like a lot of us have gone through. Number one, it teaches us, it has showed us what we are willing to tolerate, what we're willing to accommodate, what we're comfortable with. We learn, right? And once you have that experience, then you're going to create new boundaries because you're like, I actually don't like loaning you money. I actually don't want you in my house. I actually don't want you around my kids, right? I don't actually like, now that I've had this experience, I have learned some things. I'm going to create a new boundary to address the way that I feel about these things that I've learned, right? So boundaries have to evolve as you learn and grow. But then boundaries also evolve in how you uphold boundaries in relationship to others, right? Conventional wisdom will tell us that you should not uphold a boundary with someone the same way the first day that you met them as you would after a year of friendship, or 5 years of friendship, or 10 years of friendship, or 20 years of friendship, right? Friendship and relationship and trust and intimacy and compassion and commitment to one another. These are things, again, with discernment that demonstrate to us who is worthy and who deserves our trust. So we want to be mindful about if we have walls up in relationships with people who have shown us that they're invested in our best good, right? They've shown us that they are here for us for the long haul. They've shown us love. They've shown us care. They've shown us compassion. They've shown us understanding. But we have walls up towards them. That's not about them. That's about us. And that is a place where healing is necessary, okay? So to restore order, to restore balance in our lives, to restore ma'at in our lives and in our relationships, You have to assess where you have walls and not boundaries. Where are the places where you, and the relationships, the places, the opportunities, the relationships, where energy is blocked, where flow is blocked, where growth is blocked? And how can you change that wall into a boundary? All right. Evaluate how you can do that by understanding what was the reason why you created a wall in the first place. What was the source of that trauma? Where did it come from? Trace it back to the source. Understand the motivation that caused you to erect that wall. Understand and begin doing the work on the healing that needs to happen to the trauma that created that wall. And instead of creating that wall, going back to those 4 steps and thinking about how we transform that wall into a healthy boundary by learning what we need, by understanding and discerning other people and whether or not they deserve trust, by listening to our intuition, and by determining what you're comfortable with. In places where you do already have healthy boundaries, evaluate those boundaries. Have they been properly communicated in your relationships? Because if you haven't properly communicated your boundaries at your job, in your relationships with your kids, with your mama, then you're probably not enforcing them either. Because if people don't know your boundaries, then how can they know your boundaries, right? Like, how can they know if they are pressing up against or irking you or causing you harm or irritating something that is a soft, sensitive spot for you, and if they're not giving you what you need or being what they need or being safe with you, how can they know that if you haven't communicated your boundaries, right? And in some cases, listen, in some cases, you're going to find people who are intentionally pressing up against your boundaries because they're trying to take advantage of you. I'm not going to say that ain't true. Of course, that's true. There are going to be people who are pressing up against the boundaries because they want to see how far they can take you. They want to see how far you're going to let them go. And there are other people who are pressing up against your boundaries because you didn't say it was a boundary. And so they just don't know. And not because they actually intentionally want to harm you or want you to be unhappy, but because they weren't aware that this was a thing that was causing you displeasure or causing you any measure of harm. So if your boundaries have not been consistently enforced, then now is the time to begin to consistently enforce them. And don't allow people to say you cannot enforce them now just because you never enforced them before. Because yes, you can. You absolutely can. That's the whole journey we're on. Is, again, you're going to change, you're going to evolve, you're going to grow, and therefore what you need to preserve yourself evolves with you. Now, I'm not going to promise you that when you start enforcing boundaries that you didn't enforce before, that everybody's going to be happy about it. People ain't going to be happy about it. They're not going to like it, right? They're going to have words. They're going to have things to say. And especially if these are new boundaries, right? Because again, there's a difference. You may have boundaries you've always had that weren't properly communicated or properly enforced that you need to go back and reinforce. You may have learned things about yourself recently and you're like, you know what? I need new boundaries to address this new sense of self that I have. That I need new boundaries to address this new way that I feel about myself. I need to change things in our interactions in order for me to feel good, right? In order for me to feel like these relationships, these interactions are healthy and in my aunt, okay? And when you do that, when you establish new boundaries, when you communicate those new boundaries to the people who need to know that, they're not always going to respond positively. Like people don't have to like them. This is not about their responses. This is about you and your self-preservation, okay? I watched a video this week on, I think it was an Instagram reel, and it was a mom whose child was home during the day, and she was working from home in her office, and she was saying that she recently set a new boundary with her child, right? And she told the child, you know, when you were little, you would come in mama's office and you would sit with me while I worked, right? But now you're older, and while I'm working and while I'm doing meetings, I need you can't be in the room anymore. Like, you're gonna have to sit in the living room. You're gonna have to do your own homework. You're gonna have to engage with your father. You gotta do some other things. Okay, you can't be in here. And what did the child do? The child threw a temper tantrum. Because the child didn't like that. Like, no, I want to be in here. What you mean? This is a new boundary. This is not like you let me be in here before. This is not okay. You changing things up. So the child got upset. The child started crying. The child started bargaining and being like, well, can we compromise? Can we, like, what can I get from you? How can I use my emotions to influence you to change your boundary? And I'm talking about a child in this example, but let's be real. Adults is going to do the same thing. They're going to cry. They're going to bargain. They're going to try to get you to negotiate. You're going to say, I want X, Y, and Z. And they're going to be like, well, what if I just give you X? Well, would you just be okay with Z? They're not going to just, most people, some people are exceptional and extraordinary. Most people are not just going to accept your boundaries. They're going to be like, this is uncomfortable for me. So how can I make this more comfortable for me, right? Your boundaries are uncomfortable for me. How do I make this more comfortable for me? Just like the child did. So let me be clear. I'm saying this because temper tantrums, people having a temper tantrum is not necessarily, well, it's not mature for adults to be doing it, but that's not even still necessarily a reason to like excommunicate or cut off the relationship. Not completely, not by itself. In that video, eventually the child accepted the mother's boundary, okay? And so why she was posting the video was to show that the daughter, because the mother wouldn't allow her in the office, the daughter went and got a pillow and a blanket and laid down on the floor in front of the office door. Okay, so like in the hallway, and like across the front of the office door, right? So the mother can't get out the office without the child is right. You stepping over the child, right? And so the child is like, I'm not in your office because you told me I can't be in here, but I want to be close to you. So this is the best way I can be close to you is being in the hallway. So I'm going to just lay here in the hallway so I can hear you, so I can see you, even while I'm respecting and accepting the boundary that you set by not being in the office. That's what we expect from the people who love and value us in their lives. We expect acceptance of boundaries. They don't gotta like your boundaries. They just have to accept them and learn to live with your boundaries. They have to love you enough to say, I don't like this, but if this is what you need, I'm gonna give this to you. I'm going to support you in this. I'm going to support this, even though it makes me uncomfortable, because I love you and your presence in my life is that valuable to me. Okay? So when you have people who then, when you set a boundary for the first time, when you reinforce a boundary, right? And a person consistently tries to push that boundary, to ask you to compromise that boundary, to ask you to relax the boundary or to get rid of the boundary altogether, that's the red flag that you need to pay attention to, that tells you that this is not a person who values your life. And a person who doesn't value you has no place in your circle. Because remember, the whole goal of boundaries is self-preservation. And a person who doesn't value you will not help and support to preserve you. All right? So I hope that this conversation was beneficial, useful to you all. Again, something that I've been thinking about, contemplating, because I think that it's important for us to reassess our boundaries every now and again, because we grow, because we change. We're not static individuals. Our life experiences change us and evolve us constantly. And so that means our boundaries are constantly changing and require reevaluation, redefining what we need to preserve, love, and value ourselves in every single moment. And then making sure that we put the tools in place and the actions in place to make sure we can protect that and protect ourselves no matter what. All right? So I hope y'all continue to do that work. Like I'm going to continue to do that work. I appreciate, again, you all joining us for today's communion. We will be back here for our next regularly scheduled communion in 2 weeks. Same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, same places, YouTube and Facebook Live. In the meantime, if you got anything out of this message today, we appreciate the reciprocity that you send to us, the ma'at that you send to us in the form of your financial donations. You can send them to Cash App, $ Temple of Anu, or by PayPal to templeofanu@gmail.com. Your donations at this time are helping us to secure a new in-person location so that we can resume supporting our community with our physical presence. And we're really looking forward to getting into that space. And so we appreciate all of the reciprocity, all of the energy that you send us in that form to help us to reach our goals and get closer to that point. And until next time, Shemi Amatep, everyone.